I've been wanting to upload challenge runs on YouTube for a while now, but I never had the right run to start with. Until this idea hit me. I was rewatching old RTS challenge run videos over the past few weeks, and I started to wonder. Most Warcraft 3 challenge runs are done by virtue of very specific armies. So what would a run look like where you couldn't use units of the premier races that the factions are named after? This is the first video in a series that will span the entire campaign, starting with Can You Beat the Human campaign without humans? The rules are as follows. I can use workers for worker purposes, but all fighting must be done by units that are not humans. No build missions don't count unless they give me ample non-human units, in which case I have to try to beat the mission without humans to prove that it can or cannot be done. Towers are allowed, but only as a last resort, and I must play on hard. With the rules covered, let's get into the run. Mission 1 is a no-build mission where you are only given Arthas and Footmen, so this one has to be skipped. I grabbed the very minimal hero loot here, in case later down the line the real hero of the story ends up needing it. Mission 2 is the first mission where you're actually allowed to build things in this campaign. I'm given some starting workers and an uncontrollable AI ally, Uther, who helps defend my base. I start off the mission by sending Arthas as a princely emissary to the nearby dwarves who decide to join my army. He then goes off into the trees to do his best peasant roleplay for the rest of the mission. The mission has two major objectives. One is to defeat the Orc Blade Master at the far end of the map, and the other is to establish a base, requiring me to build a barracks, 2 farms, and 6 footmen. The dwarves also give a side objective to hunt a black dragon in the hills for a hero item reward. Considering that it's dwarves who gave me the quest, I'm obligated to help out. Plus, the fire orb might come in handy later, so I make that my primary objective. I build a barracks and start pumping out as many riflemen as I can, while also repairing and rebuilding my defensive towers after orc attack waves. Once a sufficient amount of dwarves with guns are acquired, I rush the dragon, have Arthas return the heart, and promptly go back to appreciating nature with his peasants. After this, I decided to test if I really needed to build 6 disgusting footmen in order to win. I produce nearly 20 riflemen and charge into the orc base. All of the orcs and trolls fall before my expert army, and the Blade Master with his primitive sword is no match for Black Powder. He falls easily, finishing the mission. This is another no-build mission, which I initially wrote off and did normally. Until my friend who was watching me suggested that Jaina's summoned water elementals aren't actually humans, despite being summoned by one. I couldn't argue with this logic and begrudgingly decided to try and complete the mission with only water elementals and the very few non-human units I get near the end of the mission. Initially, this resulted in me trying to run Jaina past everything to meet up with the priests near the end, but I quickly found out that if you leave the town at the start of the mission at the mercy of the bandits, they will lock on to Arthas' position and hunt him to the ends of the earth. They won't even fight the undead on the map, they only care about the Crown Prince. After multiple resets and multiple attempts where one bandit gets away, only for Arthas to execute him, I finally found a working strategy of dumping all of Jaina's mana to have 3 water elementals at once. These 3 are enough to fight back the bandit wave and save the town. The townsfolk then prove why they should not be trusted, as instead of rewarding Jaina or her heroic water elementals, they instead run all the way back to where Arthas is sitting still, thanking him, the lazy prince, for saving their village. After that ordeal, I go AFK for about 5 minutes while Jaina regens her mana, then execute some murlocs and sprint past the undead. After meeting up with the priests, the 2 of them plus 1 more water elemental can take down the nearby ghouls and meet up with Dargal, the heroic dwarven mortar team. The undead can't see Dargal up this cliff, so I leave him to very slowly kill every possible undead. I learned the hard way that Dargal, a water elemental, and 2 priests cannot take on the 14 skeletons in a head-on confrontation, so this was the only way to progress. After Dargal thins their numbers, I summon a water elemental and fight the 6 skeletons on more even ground. Annoyingly, the undead seem to understand just how valuable my mortar teams and priests really are, and will run past the water elementals to focus them down. I can use this to my advantage though, getting multiple undead attacking a single priest, and then running that man in circles while I shell the undead with mortars. The final fight consists of 4 skeletons, 4 ghouls, and a single abomination, requiring me to pull these forces apart to fight them in little smaller groups, using the healing provided by my priests to keep my limited forces alive. It turns out that the ghouls don't actually spawn until you walk forces up near the warehouse, and the abomination is hidden behind it, allowing me to easily pull just the skeletons, then just the ghouls, and finally just the abomination by itself. This mission was tedious, but possible without humans, thanks to a heroic group of 2 elves, a dwarven mortar team, and an absolute tidal wave worth of water elementals. Starting the next mission, I begin by building a few towers for early defense, as well as tech structures so that I can begin dwarf and elf production as quickly as possible. In the meantime, Arthas begins his purge early, killing my starting footman in a hard-fought battle in the trees. Jaina, appalled by this heinous act, slays Arthas for his crimes. I was still warming up to playing RTS games again during this mission, so during the first attack wave, my towers weren't ready, causing me to lose a priest, a peasant, and needing to use a water elemental to survive. But past the very start, the rest of the attacks posed minimal threat. I spent my time target firing down the necromancers and meat wagons with my mortar teams, while my towers took care of all the melee units. I decided that the most damage-efficient route is to focus on rifleman production until I get nearly a full control group of them, and then to start interspersing priests and mortar teams for healing and backline fire support. Riflemen make up a surprisingly high damage and reasonably durable frontline, especially when controlled well using pullback micro. After gathering a substantial army and defending a weak attack wave, I take my army of dwarves out and clear the expansion, just to make absolutely sure that I'd never run out of money. After reaching just below 80 supply, it's time to introduce the undead to the power of guns and the holy light. They were woefully underprepared for my advanced dwarven technology, the entire base falling down without me losing a single unit. When the dwarves come face to face with the man responsible for the plague, they don't stop to question him, instead surrounding him and summarily executing him for his crimes against the Alliance. Despite his demise at the hands of Jaina, somehow Arthas returned, calling into question if the Prince of Lordaeron himself is actually an undead, and worse yet, he steals the kill on Kel'Thuzad. Arthas is proving to be a real hindrance to the true heroes of the Alliance. At the start of Mission 5, many civilians turn into zombies and start attacking my units. Due to the Faden, I can't stop my human units from attacking at least a few times, but as soon as I gain control, I walk them all away and let the dwarves handle the situation. Arthas, the undead sympathizer, then continues his purge, killing all of his human troops who dared to attack the zombies, leaving just him and his captain to have a bonding moment while the town is being besieged from 3 different angles. This mission was the first major difficulty spike that required me to actually use some of my brain. I still wasn't operating at peak potential, but I did have to macro well and use some micro to keep my units alive. The undead on this mission send very strong attack waves very often. They give a decent period of reprieve after the very first wave, but then they start sending constant units and never stop. Worse yet, because I don't have access to Arthas and his powerful healing, I can't acquire the expansion base early, meaning that I will never be able to effectively defend it even if I do later get it. I'm stuck on 1 base income, defending 3 sides with riflemen, mortar teams, priests, and sorceresses. Worse yet, I didn't remember where the first attack wave came from. I prepared towers at both of the left side entrances to my base, but they came from the right, causing me to suffer considerable damage very early on in the mission. 2 towers, 4 riflemen, and a priest were not nearly enough to confidently hold an attack wave with 2 abominations. They didn't even give me a moment to recover my health before sending some ghouls to the bottommost entrance, but luckily my towers were strong enough to handle that attack. I remembered from my years of playing this mission casually as a kid that the bonus objective is a fairly strong stat stick item that I wanted to give my hero later in the run, and that the attack waves on my base would quickly start to ramp up, bringing both necromancers and meat wagons to siege my towers. To be able to comfortably fight my way through some of the defenses, as well as defend my base from the undead units more adept at sieging bases, I needed mortar teams, but to keep them safe and have enough firepower to take down the abominations, I needed riflemen. Without sorceresses, the strongest units would be able to deal heavy damage, and without priests, I would slowly lose all of my units due to the repeated fighting. After a short period of deliberation, I decided that focusing on getting 3 priests, and then a full 12 riflemen made the most sense. I'd learned by now that the enemy units go incredibly far out of their way to attack backline units like mortar teams, so without riflemen, they were sure to die during standard attack waves. 3 mortar teams would have to be enough to kill their backline. I simply couldn't afford any more. To compound the difficulty, this was the first mission where my unit control started to become an issue. With the way that the base is laid out, it's very easy to get my units stuck on each other, and out of their optimal range to attack. But trying to push my riflemen further up would often result in them missing out on DPS and getting too close to the enemy instead. This led to the death of many more towers than were necessary over the course of the mission, wasting even more resources. As much as I've hyped this up, thus far there hasn't been anything truly crippling to try and fight with my army. I've needed to macro better than in prior missions, but that's what I've always been good at in RTS anyways. That, however, would not last. In trying to go for the bonus objective, I encountered the purple undead's level 6 Lich. Frost Nova would easily decimate my clumped up forces, and Death and Decay would prove to be deadly to my towers. The bonus itself was easy enough to do, especially after the level 6 Lich died as part of the attack wave, but I made multiple mistakes right afterwards. The bonus objective undead have the Disease Cloud upgrade, dealing damage over time and bruising my entire army as they walk home. Then they are intercepted by a purple attack wave who once again has their Lich, and instead of just letting them kill a few priests who were lagging behind, I pulled my entire army into the fray, taking heavy damage and ending up out of position for the next attack. Things would not calm down for the rest of the mission either. I took the expansion base knowing full well it would die, but I needed the gold to rebuild my lost mortar teams and to keep making riflemen. When there were around 5 minutes remaining, I had a peasant start building farms in random corners of my base, and even one down by Arthas, knowing full well that I would not be able to hold the final attack. At the 2-minute remaining mark, my gold mine ran out. The forces I had would have to be enough. The full might of the undead came from my base 30 seconds later. A level 6 Lich, a level 10 Lich, multiple abominations and necromancers. I had to pull my forces out of my own choke and let my towers buy me some time. I pulled everything back to the final natural choke near where Arthas was hiding out, and used the rest of my base as bait while I focused down the level 10 Lich. In the end, I was being overrun. I would not have survived, but then the timer ran out, and I won. For the first time ever, this cutscene showing off how many undead there were was actually accurate. Considering his help on the second mission, Uther isn't so bad for a human. If the last mission was hard, this one was borderline impossible. I won't beat around the bush or sugarcoat it at all. The culling was the single hardest mission in this campaign, and it's not even close. This mission got changed and reforged, and the difficulty increased substantially, even when playing normally. But without Arthas, or any starting forces, it became completely obscene. As is tradition, Arthas starts off the mission by murdering his troops, further showing his allegiance to the other side, and I begin producing riflemen as fast as I possibly can. I need to enter the city and save the citizens with my musket balls before Mal'Ganis turns them into zombies. Whoever gets 100 first wins. The problem lies with Mal'Ganis himself. He is a level 8 Dreadlord with his ultimate ability Inferno, which does small damage in an area, stuns all of my forces for 4 seconds, and summons an Infernal for 3 minutes. The Infernal does heavy damage with its auto attacks and has the Immolation Aura passive, dealing damage to any enemy nearby. This single summoned unit can fight the armies I was able to build all on its own. When paired with Mal'Ganis using his AoE spell Carrion Swarm, just the enemy hero can practically solo my entire army. And more often than not, he comes with a small entourage of undead that gets stronger as the mission progresses. I can't really fight Mal'Ganis ever, but very shortly after I enter the city, he'll start sprinting his forces directly for mine, trying to force an all-out confrontation. The only safe haven I have is the fact that if I lead Mal'Ganis out of the city, he teleports back in, along with all of his forces, but he'll leave the Infernal behind. I had to spend so long building up forces to even stand a chance that by the time I entered the city, Mal'Ganis had already converted 40 citizens. Meanwhile, I was entering with 8 riflemen and 2 priests. I foolishly tried to challenge Mal'Ganis and his army, losing multiple riflemen and a priest, but I did kill his ghouls, which would stall his progress on more buildings. Finally, I was able to start helping the citizens myself, but without the high DPS of Arthas or the Knights, breaking buildings was difficult. Due to the heavy losses sustained early, I never had enough money to reasonably tech up into mortar teams. It was all rifles and priests this mission. The reforged version of this mission added some unique events to make the culling more flavorful, but they also made it substantially harder with this challenge. Some citizens tried to defend their homes from me, and 2 of the houses contained random bosses instead of citizens. I had wanted to send every new unit that I trained to help inside the city itself, but with such low income, I needed to use whatever units I had freshly trained to help defend my base from attack waves. After barely defending an attack wave with a meat wagon on the right side of my base, my 4 priests and 7 riflemen found themselves in the bottom left corner of Stratholme, clearing out a grouping of 5 buildings, when Mal'Ganis decided he was tired of converting citizens and would rather just kill my forces. Helpfully, some new riflemen that I was rallying into the city intercepted the undead and distracted them for a minute, but ultimately he found my men. I lost almost all of my riflemen for a second time, as my base was also being assaulted. Despite my best efforts, the undead were over halfway to victory, and I was barely a third of the way there. Even worse, neither of the bosses had spawned out of the buildings yet. With almost no gold left in the bank, but a small army of 10 riflemen and 5 priests, I ran back into the city with one purpose: stop the Dreadlord and avenge my fallen dwarves. I knew I could take the fight this time because he was out of mana after the last confrontation. He was able to cast one Carrion Swarm and summon his Infernal, but after that he could only auto-attack. I suffered some losses, but it was well worth it. Killing Mal'Ganis gave me a minute and a half to clear with impunity. Only for the first building that I destroyed to contain the boss Salram the Fleshcrafter, who has Finger of Pain which one-shots any unit he targets with it. After my dwarves got fingered and my base nearly got busted again, I was finally able to make some substantial progress in the city. Thanks to all the fighting we did, there were a few zombies that Mal'Ganis didn't claim, allowing me to get some free progress and slow him down. By the time he respawned, I was almost halfway to victory, and I knew he wouldn't rush to kill my units right away. For the first time all mission, I managed to acquire an army of a full 12 riflemen, and still had some priests left over to heal them. My base, however, was in shambles at this point, but I was determined to win before it died completely. Mal'Ganis must have smelled my desperation though, because as soon as I made the choice to go all in on finishing the mission, the second boss Meathook spawned, and Mal'Ganis ran over to attack me. To make sure that Arthas wouldn't help at all while my base was being destroyed, I ran him into Stratholme to go stand in the corner where nothing else was really happening. Looking around during all this chaos, I noticed something. Mal'Ganis really wanted to kill me now. He was manually commanding his units to attack mine, which gave me an idea. I would need to kite his forces around the entire city, using my superior range to take pot shots at buildings, finishing the objective while under constant threat. Many brave dwarves had to sacrifice themselves to give me the required distance, but as soon as I made space between my riflemen and his army, I began running them around in a large circle in Stratholme, eventually splitting my forces into two groups. One group of 2 dwarves who continued to run around for the rest of the mission, and another group with every other dwarf I could muster, who were tasked with destroying buildings. It turns out that 4 riflemen are just enough to kill a citizen in a single volley, which could not have been more perfect. Slowly but surely, my numbers climbed while Mal'Ganis was distracted, and with my base under attack slowly dying, the last 6 riflemen managed to save Stratholme. Arthas, despite not doing anything for these people, then gets goaded into chasing Mal'Ganis to Northrend, not even stopping to honor the fallen dwarves and elves who bravely gave their life for his cause. This is where things get simple again, thankfully. After the last 2 missions, I needed a bit of a break. The start of this mission is a no-build segment, where you're meant to fight your way through the random trolls and wolves of Northrend with Arthas and some footmen. Instead, the cowardly prince runs past everyone with Divine Shield active, and meets the true hero of the Alliance, Muradin Bronzebeard. Arthas quickly deposits all of his valuable items in Muradin's bags, and moves once again to hide in the trees. I'm beginning to think that Arthas might be a night elf at this rate. With Muradin finally to tank some damage from my other units, the next few missions are substantially easier. Stormbolt can snipe priority targets like casters with ease, and Thunderclap gives my army some much needed control and AoE damage. With this mission I also gain access to flying machines, but they suck and aren't worth building, so the only ones I'm ever gonna have are the ones I start with. The first attack wave is slightly difficult, but that's mostly due to me not targeting down necromancers properly. After that first attack, I get some towers built, and nothing else the undead sends poses a major threat. I begin 2 barracks rifleman production, prioritizing damage upgrades, and I tech towards priests. In no time I have a substantial army. Muradin asked Arthas to rescue his men, but after seeing the sorry state the prince was in, realized he needed to do it himself. So Muradin with his 7 riflemen ran off to help the other dwarves. They already had a workshop built which would boost me into mortar team production much more easily. The first push didn't go amazingly, but did kill off many of the undead forces, and by the second attack I was able to break the undead lines, destroy their production. The other dwarves already had a workshop built, which would boost me into mortar team production much more easily. The first push admittedly didn't go amazing, but it did kill off many of the undead forces, and by the second attack I was able to break the undead lines and destroy their production. Mid-fight, Muradin leveled up to level 6, unlocking his ultimate, Avatar, which massively boosts his health and damage for a period of time. After destroying the crypt which was producing units to attack Muradin's men, I ran back to defend my base, and then finally rescued his men, using the mortar teams to take out the leftover defensive structures. From this point on, the rest of the mission was a simple endeavor, of just maxing out my upgrades, building a few more priests and mortar teams, and then attacking the undead base. There were some reasonably scary defensive structures in their base, but with good mortar team target fire and Muradin killing priority targets, it was very manageable. Once the Black Citadel was destroyed, the undead had nothing left that could threaten my forces. Mission 8 is the final no-build mission of the human campaign, and it's on a 15-minute timer. The whole gimmick of this mission is that you're supposed to recruit mercenaries to help your starting forces clear through the undead. But as I found out on my first attempt, the opening undead encampment is very hard to breach without Arthas' healing, and the first mercenaries you can acquire are liable to die very easily in the major fights you encounter, making them practically a waste of money. I actually failed this mission on my first try. I was trying to go fast to beat the timer, and assumed it would be easy like it usually is, and ended up losing a mortar team and multiple mercenaries. I had to restart and take things slower and much more tactical. Any damage on my mortar teams would be permanent, so I had to keep them safe at all costs. Without them, I would never breach the undead bases. On my second attempt, I kept my mortar teams very far back, and pulled apart the undead forces to kill them one by one. I needed to preserve as much of Muradin's limited mana as I could. At the first mercenary camp, I bought 2 priests and all of the ranged fighters, but nothing else. I then make sure to position my 2 mortar teams on the strategic high ground to destroy the buildings while staying away from the rest of combat. This first undead base was without question the hardest part of this mission. Up next were some Nerubians who were easily dealt with by Muradin using Avatar. The second mercenary camp is far more useful than the first one. I buy out 2 more ranged units and 2 ogres who can cast Bloodlust to amplify the attack speed of my entire army. With only a few murlocs in the way, I reach the third boat and the third mercenary camp with no problem. Here I kill off my weak ranged trolls in exchange for 2 healing units and 2 bulky frontline ogres. At this point I only have 6 minutes left to finish the mission, and I have to hurry. There's a trench ahead full of undead spirit towers. Normally you're meant to buy the teleportation amulet and then have Arthas run through with Divine Shield. But today, Muradin just tanks the damage like a Chad and teleports all my forces across. The final obstacle is a grouping of graveyards and necromancers supported by a few other undead forces, but with all the troops that I have, they pose little threat. As the mission ends, the humans show why they can't be trusted as Arthas and his men mercilessly slaughter the mercenaries who helped us do this mission. The final mission of the human campaign, and the only one where I get access to the amazing Dwarven Griffin Rider. Every time that I played this mission as a kid, my go-to strategy would be to mass griffins, and I wanted to relive that glory here. I was also determined to see how far I could get without completing the main objective of getting Frostmourne. In the no-build section trying to claim Frostmourne, Muradin and the other dwarves turned on Arthas and his knights, refusing to help the prince claim the blade, and assuring him that the dwarven forces back home could handle Mal'Ganis on their own. As such, I began getting every upgrade I could while starting Griffin production very early. The first few attack waves were easily held with just towers and my starting forces, allowing me to grow my army. Once I had a full control group of griffins, I sent my riders to attack the purple undead who was attacking me from the right. They cleared out the base with surprisingly little resistance. The hardest part to deal with was the defensive structures rather than the units. As time went on, my army size grew, but I made sure to avoid hitting high upkeep just in case I needed the money later. I was even able to take and fortify a forward base next to Mal'Ganis' main base. It was a very, very slow endeavor, but I managed to destroy many of his army units and a few production structures that he refused to rebuild. Once I saw that I had sniped all that I could, I realized I had to switch up my army. Griffins alone wouldn't be enough. I needed to create the very best unit in the game, the best the humans had to offer. Or, well, the non-humans. If I wanted to bust his base for real, I would need siege engines. I switched to full production of siege engines. With a full control group of them, and then a few leftover griffins to kill any workers trying to rebuild, I charged the undead base. The massive building damage of the siege engines shredded the undead structures, and when all was said and done, they had no production buildings left, or workers to rebuild with. Once again, I maxed out on griffin riders and went in for the final assault. Only Mal'Ganis himself and a select few buildings were left alive. Once they were destroyed, I should win. As it turns out though, Blizzard does not appreciate me trying to break their canon this hard. Mal'Ganis infinitely resurrects until Frostmourne is claimed. Muradin and his 3 riflemen heroically charge forward, trying to seal the Runeblade away forever, only for Arthas to run in and claim the blade, sacrificing his soul and Muradin's life for its power. The dwarves back home are furious at Arthas for his crimes, and he is promptly executed for a second time. The true heroes make their way to Mal'Ganis for a final time, killing him once and for all. Only for Arthas to show up again. He's definitely undead by this point. I just wish we knew what necromancer was bringing him back so the Alliance could be free of the plague known as Arthas. Thank you everyone for watching. I've been doing personal challenge runs for a while now, and I figured it'd be cool to upload a video on one of them. This one was certainly inspired by Giant Grant Games. He is the master of RTS challenge runs after all, and I hope that I didn't show the influence too much in my video style. I have many different games in mind to try runs in, but I don't want to get too far ahead of myself just yet. I'm using this as a way to branch out a bit. I still love Guilty Gear, and we'll be talking about it. That content will absolutely stay. But I like so many different games that I don't want to be stuck making content for just one. This challenge run series will also be ongoing until I finish all of the campaigns under this rule set, and then I'll need to find a new idea at that point. I am incredibly concerned for the next campaign, the Undead one, and I'm going to guess ahead of time that it's going to be the most difficult of all of them. So if you want to see me suffer, tune in for the next installment of this challenge. Overall, I actually had a really fun time recording and working on this. Streaming my initial run to my friends was extra entertaining as they sometimes had helpful ideas, and sometimes had ideas that made my life harder, like trying to finish Mission 3 without humans. So, I hope you all enjoyed too, and until next time.